She beat me with a leather strap for taking lunch breaks, sent CPS after my dad, and tried to steal custody. So I weaponized her own rules, recorded everything, and took her down with one courtroom bombshell. When my stepmom moved in with me and my dad, she told me in private that there was just one thing she wanted me to do for her. I had to be productive at all times, and not just in a normal, get your homework done way. She wanted me to text her whenever I was being productive, along with timestamps. Said it was the best way of keeping me accountable. And at the end of every day, I had to log my hours into a shared family spreadsheet to prove I wasn't wasting my life away. I followed her dumb rule at first, mainly out of curiosity. And on the first day she checked, she bent me over and slapped my behind with a leather tool for every hour that I was unproductive. Meanwhile, her two sons could play FIFA all day with no consequences. And I was already an overachiever, the type to feel like I was a failure unless I got all A's. So this only made it worse. And it wasn't until 3 months later that I finally saw through her BS. Because one day, after I had an extremely productive 24 hours, she still slapped me. The reason? For eating lunch for 15 minutes without making it productive through multitasking. But I didn't stop following her rule. In fact, I followed it even more. Because if Stella wanted to track every single hour of my day, I would do just that. I started tracking absolutely everything. And I mean everything. I logged the Excel sheet with BS like 7:23 p.m. to 7:24 p.m. Productive blinking session, maintained eye moisture for optimal vision, 10:15 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Productive oxygen exchange via breathing, converting oxygen to carbon dioxide. At first, I could tell it made her eyes twitch with stress, but she was able to brush it off and calm herself down. So I upped my game. I started spamming her with texts all day to ensure what I was doing was productive. Hey Stella, do you think I should read Wuthering Heights or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde during lunch today? How long do you think I should take in the bathroom if I'm taking a number 2 while slightly constipated? Productivity alert. Currently producing saliva at an above average rate. The day is going well. At the end of each day during our productivity review sessions, I would present slideshows about what I did in between each bite of food I took, every thought I had while walking to and from school, and every word that me and my friends exchanged, rating them all from 1 to 10 on a productivity scale, deciding how many times Stella should hit me. I would drag them out until she was so tired she fell asleep, and as soon as she did, I'd shake her awake and tell her we weren't being productive if she wasn't listening to me. When her parents came to visit, I interrupted every few minutes with a question. Sorry, Stella, but I've been awake for almost 30 hours trying to be productive. Is it okay if I sleep for a little bit, or is that too unproductive? I'm gonna play an audiobook while I sleep. Her parents glared at her, not knowing if it was a joke. Her mom even asked if I was on the spectrum. The breaking point came at a family reunion 3 months later. It was me, my dad, my stepmom, and both of their sides of the family. Right when everyone was eating and the garden was silent, I came running out in tears. Stella, I'm sorry. I just realized that when I went to the bathroom, I didn't bring any reading material with me, which makes me a lazy piece of shit like you always say. She tried to laugh it off as a joke, but that's when I took out the leather tool she hit me with and bent over in front of her. Just hit me. I deserve it this time. Her mom gasped. My grandparents on my dad's side looked like they were about to faint. What the F is going on? My grandmother said. Before Stella could answer, I responded with, oh, I'm just not being productive right now, so I'm asking Stella to punish me like she always does. Stella's face turned ghost white. It's not. That's not what, she stammered. Oh, I have photos of the bruises if you need documentation, I exclaimed. I've been productively documenting everything like Stella taught me. Should I go get them? Her father stood up. Bruises? What bruises? Even my dad for the first time finally spoke up. I think it's time for you to leave, he said, turning to Stella. She didn't even fight it. She knew she couldn't. And with that, she finally left. The rest of the barbecue was pretty awkward after that, and everyone made excuses for why they had to go home. And TBH, I felt like a winner. It was the moment I had been dreaming about ever since Stella first moved in. The next day at school, the creepy guidance counselor pulled me aside and demanded that I lift up my sleeves. I hesitated, but he grabbed my arm and did it himself. That's when he was faced with the bruises. Your stepmom was right. Your dad has been hitting you, I sighed. No, 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 I said, pulling my arm back. It wasn't my dad. It was Stella. The guidance counselor, Mr. McNicholas, narrowed his eyes at me. That's not what she told me when she called this morning. She said she was worried about you, that your father had been getting more aggressive lately. My stomach dropped. She'd called him this morning, but she'd left yesterday at the family reunion. My hands started shaking as I realized what was happening. Stella had been planning this. She'd been setting this up as her backup plan. Listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My dad has never laid a hand on me. These bruises are from Stella. She's been hitting me with a leather strap every day for months. Mr. McNicholas shook his head and picked up his phone. I'm sorry, but I'm mandated to report this. I've already called Child Protective Services based on your stepmother's concerns. They'll be here within the hour. I felt the blood drain from my face. You already called them? Before even talking to me? Your stepmother provided very detailed documentation, he said, pulling out a folder. She's been keeping notes about your father's behavior for months. Late night arguments, aggressive behavior, controlling tendencies. I grabbed the folder before he could stop me and flipped through it. My hands trembled as I read Stella's neat handwriting, dates and times of supposed incidents. My dad yelling at me for staying up too late. Never happened. Him grabbing my arm roughly when I tried to leave the house. Completely made up. Her catching him shaking me by the shoulders. Pure fiction. This is all lies, I shouted, throwing the folder back on his desk. She made all of this up. That's what abuse victims often say, Mr. McNicholas said in that condescending tone adults use when they think they know better. They protect their abusers. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip his desk over. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my photos. Look at these bruises. They're from a leather strap, not hands. You can see the pattern. He barely glanced at them. Those could be from anything. Your stepmother mentioned you've been self-harming for attention. The door opened and 2 people in suits walked in. A woman with a severe bun and a younger man with a tablet. We're from Child Protective Services, the woman said. We need to speak with you. The next hour was a blur. They asked me questions about my home life, about my dad, about Stella. Every time I tried to explain about the productivity tracking and the beatings, they exchanged these knowing looks, like I was just another troubled kid making up stories. We're going to need to remove you from the home while we investigate, the woman finally said. What? No, my dad didn't do anything. It's just temporary. worry, she assured me, though her voice suggested otherwise. We've arranged for you to stay with a family member. Your stepmother's sister, Samantha, has agreed to take you in. My blood ran cold. Stella's sister? No, please, you don't understand. This is what Stella wanted. She planned this, but they weren't listening. Within an hour, I was in the back of a CPS van with a garbage bag full of hastily packed clothes. I texted my dad frantically but got no response. Later, I found out they'd shown up at his work with a police escort. Samantha's house was a pristine two-story in the suburbs. She greeted me at the door with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, you poor thing, she cooed. Don't worry, you're safe now. The first few days were strange. Samantha seemed nice enough, making me meals and asking about school, but something felt off. She asked too many questions about my dad, about our home life, about whether he'd ever lost his temper with me. On the fourth night, I couldn't sleep. I crept downstairs for water and heard voices in the living room. I recognized Stella's laugh immediately. He's already lawyered up, Stella was saying, but it doesn't matter. I've got months of documentation. The social worker called me today, Samantha replied. She wanted to know if I'd noticed any concerning behavior, and I told her he seems withdrawn, angry, that he flinches when men raise their voices. I covered my mouth to keep from gasping. They were working together. Of course they were. Perfect, Stella said. Keep documenting everything. I'm filing for custody next week. With my stable home environment and his history of abuse, I crept back upstairs, my mind racing. I needed proof. I needed to record this. The next day at school, I borrowed an old phone from my friend Nick. That night, I hid it in my backpack and left it recording in the living room before going to bed. Sure enough, Stella showed up again. This time, she was coaching Samantha on exactly what to tell CPS. Tell them he has nightmares, Stella instructed, that he wakes up screaming for his dad to stop. But he doesn't, Samantha said. They don't know that, and mentioned that he's been hoarding food in his room. Classic abuse victim behavior. I recorded 3 more visits over the next 2 weeks. Each time, Stella gave more instructions, more lies to feed to CPS. She talked about the custody filing, about how she'd present the productivity spreadsheets as evidence of her structured parenting approach, while painting my dad as neglectful and abusive. My dad was only allowed supervised visits once a week at the CPS office. The first time I saw him, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His eyes were red and his hands shook as he hugged me. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you. Dad, listen, I said quietly, glancing at the social worker who was pretending not to watch us. I have proof. Stella's been visiting Samantha. They're working together. I slipped him the USB drive I'd hidden in my shoe. Everything's on there. Audio recordings. His eyes widened. How did you? Just give it to your lawyer, I interrupted. Please. Meanwhile, my friends from school had started their own campaign. They created a shared Google Doc called The Truth About Stella, where they documented every time they'd seen bruises on me, every time I'd mentioned the productivity tracking, every weird interaction they'd witnessed. Loss, who sat next to me in English, wrote about how I'd fallen asleep in class after being kept up all night doing productivity reviews. My lab partner Nick described finding me crying in the bathroom after Stella had texted me 15 times during a single class period. But when my dad's lawyer presented it at the preliminary hearing, Stella's lawyer dismissed it immediately. Teenage rebellion, he said with a wave of his hand. Kids will say anything to avoid consequences for their behavior. Stella sat there in a conservative suit, looking every inch the concerned stepmother. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she described how hard she'd tried to provide structure for a troubled child who was acting out after his parents' divorce. I only wanted what was best for him, she said, voice cracking. The productivity tracking was recommended by a parenting book. I thought it would help him develop good habits. She presented the spreadsheets as evidence, but spun them completely differently. See how dedicated I was? How much time and effort I put into helping him succeed? The judge nodded along, and I wanted to scream. How could they not see through her act? Things got worse when Stella made her next move. She claimed I'd been self-harming for attention, that the bruises were self-inflicted. She even had photos of me holding the leather strap at the family reunion. He brought it himself, she lied smoothly. I'd never seen it before that day. I was horrified when he asked me to hit him in front of everyone. It was clearly a cry for help. My dad's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The judge was looking at me with pity now, like I was some disturbed kid who hurt himself for attention. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My dad's lawyer had been doing some digging and discovered this wasn't Stella's first rodeo. She'd been married twice before, both times to men with children. Both marriages had ended with her attempting to gain custody of the kids. One of those kids, now 23, agreed to testify. He flew in from another state, and his testimony was damning. She did the exact same thing to me, he said. The productivity tracking, the beatings. Then when my dad finally started to catch on, she called CPS with fake abuse allegations. I spent 6 months in foster care before the truth came out. Stella's lawyer tried to object, calling it irrelevant, but the judge allowed it. For the first time, I saw doubt creep into her eyes as she looked at Stella. But the real turning point came at the next hearing. My grandmother on my dad's side arrived with something no one expected: security footage from the family reunion. Her neighbor had a security system that partially captured the garden where everything went down. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. You could see me approaching Stella, see my body language. Not defiant or attention-seeking, but genuinely fearful. You could see Stella's face change when I mentioned the bruises, the panic in her eyes. Play it again, the judge ordered. This time she watched Stella's reaction more carefully, the way she immediately tried to leave when my dad told her to. Not the reaction of an innocent person being falsely accused. Stella tried one last manipulation. She claimed the bruises were self-inflicted, that I'd been hurting myself for attention. But my dad's lawyer was ready. We've subpoenaed the client's medical records from the past year, he announced. Would you like to explain why none of his regular checkups noted any signs of self-harm? Why his teachers never reported any concerning behavior until after you entered his life? He also brought in my teachers to testify. Mrs. O'Nicholas, my history teacher, described how I'd gone from an engaged student to someone who constantly checked my phone and seemed anxious about being productive enough. My PE teacher mentioned finding me doing homework during lunch because I was afraid of wasting time. The final nail in Stella's coffin came when the judge decided to examine the productivity logs more carefully. My dad's lawyer pointed out something brilliant. The timestamps showed I was being monitored during school hours, with Stella somehow knowing exactly what I was doing even when she couldn't possibly have seen me. How did you know he was being unproductive at 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when he was in school and you were presumably at work? The judge asked Stella directly. Stella stammered something about me texting her updates, but the judge wasn't buying it anymore. These timestamps suggest you were requiring a child to lie to you constantly about his activities, or you had some other means of monitoring him inappropriately, the judge said sternly. sternly. Then came the biggest shock. Stella's own sons, who'd been silent through all of this, finally spoke up. The older one, who was 17, asked to address the court. "She made us lie," he said quietly. "She told us to say he was violent with us, but he never was. She hits us too, just not as much because we're her real kids." Stella's face went white. "Baby, you're confused." "No, Mom," her younger son interrupted. "We're tired of lying for you. We're tired of watching you hurt people." The case collapsed like a house of cards. The judge ordered an immediate investigation into Stella for child abuse and filing false reports. My dad was cleared of all allegations, and I was returned home that same day. But the relief was short-lived. That evening, as Dad and I sat at the kitchen table trying to process everything that had happened, his phone rang. His face went pale as he listened. "That was my lawyer," he said after hanging up. "Stella's filed a civil lawsuit. She's claiming defamation and emotional distress. She says we orchestrated the whole family reunion scene to humiliate her." I felt my stomach drop. Of course she wouldn't just disappear. That wasn't Stella's style. The next morning, I woke up to find Dad already dressed in his suit, pacing the living room. "I have to go meet with the lawyer again," he said. "They're also investigating whether I knew about the abuse and failed to report it." While Dad dealt with lawyers, I tried to return to normal life at school, but normal was impossible. Kids whispered in the hallways. Some had heard about the CPS investigation, others about the family reunion incident. The story had morphed into different versions, each more dramatic than the last. During lunch, Loss pulled me aside. "Hey, there's something weird going on. That substitute teacher in chemistry, she's been asking about you. Like really specific questions about your home life." My skin prickled. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you seem happy now that you're back with your dad, if you've mentioned anything about your stepmom. She even asked if you'd ever talked about running away." I knew immediately. Stella was behind this. She'd always been good at finding people to do her dirty work. That afternoon, the substitute teacher, Ms. Maxamantha, called me to stay after class. She closed the door and sat on the edge of her desk, giving me what I'm sure she thought was a sympathetic look. "I know things have been hard for you," she began. "Sometimes when we're removed from an abusive situation, we convince ourselves it wasn't that bad. We even miss our abusers." I stayed silent, watching her carefully. "I want you to know that if you're having second thoughts about what you said about Stella, it's not too late to tell the truth. No one would blame you for protecting your father before." There it was, the trap. If I defended Dad, she'd report that I was recanting my story about Stella. If I said anything negative about our current situation, she'd twist it into evidence that Dad was the real abuser. "I need to get to my next class," I said, standing up. She grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but enough to make me freeze. "Think about it," she said. "Stella only wants what's best for you." I yanked my arm away and left, my heart pounding. That night, I told Dad about Ms. Maxamantha. His jaw tightened. "I'll handle it," he said. But I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Stella was wearing us down, and she knew it. The harassment escalated over the next few weeks. Our mailbox was stuffed with pamphlets about parental alienation syndrome. Anonymous calls to Dad's work claimed he was unstable. Someone reported our car as abandoned, and it got towed from our own driveway. Then came the social media campaign. A Facebook page called Justice for Stella appeared overnight, filled with photos of her looking maternal and caring. The post painted her as a devoted stepmother, wrongfully accused by a manipulative teenager and his enabling father. Comments poured in from accounts I didn't recognize, all supporting Stella and calling for CPS to reopen the investigation. My friend Nick showed me the page during study hall. "Look at this comment," he said, pointing to a long post. "This person claims to be your neighbor and says they heard screaming from your house last night. We didn't have neighbors close enough to hear anything from our house, but the damage was being done." The post had been shared dozens of times. Dad hired a different lawyer, one who specialized in harassment cases, but Stella was careful. Nothing could be traced directly back to her. The substitute teacher claimed she was just a concerned educator. The Facebook page was run by anonymous administrators. The phone calls came from burner phones. One afternoon, I came home to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Spread in front of him were bills, legal bills. "How bad is it?" I asked. He looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes. "The lawyers, the court costs, the time off work. We might have to sell the house." That's when I realized Stella's new strategy. She couldn't get custody through CPS, so she was going to destroy us financially, make our lives so miserable that we'd give up. But I wasn't giving up. That night, I called Nick and Loss and asked them to come over. "We need to fight back," I said, "but we have to be smart about it." We started documenting everything. Every interaction with Ms. Maxamantha, every post on the Facebook page, every suspicious incident. Loss's older brother was studying computer science in college, and he helped us trace some of the anonymous accounts. Many were created on the same day, all using similar email patterns. Meanwhile, Stella's civil lawsuit moved forward. She hired an expensive lawyer who filed motion after motion, each requiring Dad's lawyer to respond, each response costing us more money. During a deposition, Stella sat across from me in a conference room, looking perfectly composed. Her lawyer asked me question after question about the family reunion, trying to get me to admit I'd planned the whole thing to humiliate her. "Isn't it true that you researched parental alienation online?" her lawyer asked. "No," I said. "Isn't it true that you told friends you wanted to destroy your stepmother?" "I wanted her to stop hitting me," I clarified. "Answer yes or no, please." Stella smirked slightly. She was enjoying this. The deposition went on for hours. They asked about every text I'd sent her, every productivity log entry, trying to paint me as a manipulative teenager who'd crafted an elaborate lie. When it was finally over, Dad's lawyer pulled us aside. "They're trying to bury us in paperwork and legal fees. It's a common tactic. They know they can't win on merit, so they're trying to force a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Dad asked. "Stella wants a formal apology, a retraction of all accusations, and $50,000 in damages." Dad's face went red. "Absolutely not." But as the bills piled up and the harassment continued, I could see him wavering. He started talking about taking out a second mortgage. He sold his truck and started taking the bus to work. One night, I heard him on the phone with my grandmother. "Maybe I should just pay her," he was saying. "End this nightmare." That's when I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I remembered something Stella's ex-stepson had mentioned during his testimony, that Stella had done this before. If she'd done it twice, maybe there were others. I started researching online, looking for patterns. It took weeks of digging through social media and public records, but I finally found something. A woman named Sarah in another state whose story sounded eerily familiar. Her ex-husband's new wife had accused her of abuse, launched a custody battle, and harassed her for months. I reached out to Sarah through Facebook. At first, she was suspicious, but when I explained my situation, she opened up. "That sounds exactly like what happened to me," she said during our video call. "The productivity tracking, the false accusations, everything." "What was your stepmother's name again?" When I told her, she she gasped. Oh my god, I know that name. She was in my ex-husband's grief support group. That's how they met. She targeted him because he was a widower with kids. My heart raced. Would you be willing to testify about this? Sarah hesitated. I don't know. It was such a dark time in my life. I've tried to move on. Please, I begged. She's destroying my family. Sarah promised to think about it. Meanwhile, the harassment continued. Dad's car tires were slashed. Someone called his boss claiming he was drinking on the job. The Facebook page grew more vicious, with posts suggesting Dad was grooming me for abuse. Ms. Samantha became bolder at school. She'd pull me out of other classes for counseling sessions, where she'd pressure me to admit I was unhappy at home. When I complained to the principal, he said she was just being thorough. Given your history, we have to take any concerns seriously, he said. I realized Stella had gotten to him too. The breaking point came when Dad collapsed at work. The stress had given him a panic attack so severe they thought it was a heart attack. I rushed to the hospital to find him hooked up to monitors, looking fragile and defeated. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. Maybe we should just give her what she wants. No, I said firmly. That's exactly what she wants, for us to give up. That night, while Dad slept in the hospital bed, I made a decision. I called Sarah again. I'll do it, she said before I could even ask. I'll testify. No one should have to go through what you're going through. But when Dad's lawyer filed to add Sarah as a witness, Stella's lawyer objected, claiming it was irrelevant to the defamation case. The judge agreed to hear arguments about whether to allow the testimony. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Dad was released from the hospital with strict orders to avoid stress, which was almost laughable given our situation. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything in my mind, all the evidence we'd gathered, all the ways Stella had manipulated the system. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Drop the case or things will get worse. I showed it to Dad in the morning. His hands shook as he read it. Maybe we should, he started. No, I interrupted. We're going to that hearing. We're going to fight. At the courthouse, Sarah was already there, looking nervous but determined. She'd brought a box of documents, emails, text messages, court records from her own battle with Stella years ago. Stella arrived with her lawyer and Samantha, who glared at me as they passed. Ms. Samantha was there too, sitting in the gallery like she was just a concerned observer. The judge listened as both lawyers argued about Sarah's testimony. Stella's lawyer called it a fishing expedition and prejudicial. Dad's lawyer argued it showed a pattern of behavior directly relevant to Stella's credibility. Your Honor, Dad's lawyer said, if the plaintiff has engaged in this exact same pattern of false accusations and harassment before, it speaks directly to whether her current claims of defamation have merit. The judge considered for a long moment. I'll allow the testimony, she finally ruled. Stella's face went rigid. For the first time since this all started, she looked worried. Sarah took the stand and told her story. How Stella had married her ex-husband after meeting him in a grief support group. How she'd immediately started the productivity tracking with Sarah's daughters. How when Sarah's ex finally started questioning Stella's methods, she'd filed false abuse allegations against Sarah. She nearly destroyed my life, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I lost custody of my daughters for almost a year. By the time the truth came out, I was bankrupt from legal fees. She presented emails where Stella had coached her ex-husband on what to say to CPS, text messages where she'd threatened to ruin Sarah if she didn't comply with her demands. Stella's lawyer tried to discredit Sarah, suggesting she was bitter about her divorce, but Sarah held firm. I'm not bitter, she said. I'm here because no one should have to go through what this family is going through. When Sarah stepped down, the judge called a recess. In the hallway, Stella cornered me while Dad was in the bathroom. You think you're so clever, she hissed. But this isn't over. I know people. I have resources you can't imagine. Is that a threat? I asked, pulling out my phone to record. She noticed and stepped back, forcing a smile. Of course not. I'm just saying the truth has a way of coming out. When court resumed, the judge had made her decision. Based on the testimony presented, I find significant questions about the plaintiff's credibility and motivations. The motion to dismiss the defamation claim is granted. Stella's lawyer immediately objected, but the judge cut him off. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible fraud and abuse of the legal system. Stella stood up so fast her chair fell over. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. Ma'am, please control yourself, the judge warned. But Stella was beyond control now. That boy is a manipulative liar. His father is abusive. The system is failing. The judge called for security. As officers approached, Stella pointed at me. You destroyed my life. You turned my own children against me. They escorted her out as she continued screaming. Samantha and Ms. Samantha quickly left, avoiding eye contact with everyone. In the parking lot, Dad hugged me tighter than he had in years. It's over, he whispered. It's finally over. But I knew better. Stella didn't give up that easily. The legal victory was just one battle. She'd find other ways to come at us. Sure enough, the harassment continued, though more carefully now. The Facebook page disappeared, but new ones popped up. Anonymous reviews appeared online claiming Dad's business was a scam. Someone kept signing us up for hundreds of mailing lists and catalogs. Then one day, Stella's sons showed up at our door. The older one, looking exhausted, asked if they could come in. She's lost it, he said once we were all sitting in the living room. After the court thing, she's been ranting nonstop. She's planning something. We don't know what, but she keeps saying she's going to fix everything. The younger son pulled out his phone. I recorded some of it. He played audio of Stella raging about the injustice, about how she was going to make us pay, about how she had one more card to play. You need to be careful, the older son warned. When she gets like this, we've seen what she's capable of. Dad called his lawyer immediately, but there wasn't much we could do based on vague threats. We installed security cameras and changed our locks. I started varying my route to school. We were living in fear again, waiting for Stella's next move. It came 2 weeks later. I was walking home from school when a van pulled up beside me. The door slid open and someone grabbed my arm. Get in, a man's voice said. Your dad's been in an accident. We're taking you to the hospital. Everything in me screamed danger. I yanked away and ran, hearing footsteps behind me. I ducked into a store and called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. The police found the van abandoned a few blocks away. It had been reported stolen that morning. Security footage from the store showed 2 men I didn't recognize, but when Stella's sons saw the footage, they identified one as their mother's cousin. She must have called in favors, the older son said. She's got family who aren't exactly law-abiding. The police took it seriously now. They issued a restraining order against Stella and started investigating the attempted kidnapping. But Stella had disappeared. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected. For weeks, we lived on edge. Police drove by our house regularly. I had to be escorted to and from school. Dad worked from home, afraid to leave me alone. Then Sarah called with news. I've been in touch with some other families families Stella targeted over the years. We're forming a support group, but more importantly, we're compiling evidence. There are 5 of us so far. 5 families. Stella had done this to 5 families that we knew of. The investigation expanded. The FBI got involved when they realized Stella had crossed state lines in her schemes. They found evidence of fraud, identity theft, and a pattern of abuse spanning over a decade. But Stella remained missing. Her sons stayed with their grandmother, who'd had no idea what her daughter had been doing. She cried when she apologized to us, saying she should have seen the signs. Months passed. Slowly, life began to return to normal. The nightmares faded. Dad smiled again. I caught up on schoolwork and even started feeling like a regular teenager. Then one day, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. I knew immediately it was from Stella. I showed it to the FBI agent handling our case. They traced it to a burner phone purchased with cash in another state. She's reaching out, the agent said. This might be our chance to bring her in. They asked if I'd be willing to respond, to try to draw her out. Dad was against it, but I knew this was our chance to end things for good. With the FBI monitoring, I texted back, why? The response came hours later. I never meant for it to go this far. Over the next few days, Stella and I exchanged messages. She claimed she was sick, that she needed help, that she wanted to make amends. The FBI traced her general location, but needed more to pinpoint her exactly. Then she made a mistake. She mentioned wanting to see her sons one last time. The FBI set up surveillance at locations she might try to contact them. The breakthrough came when she showed up at her younger son's soccer game. She was wearing a wig and sunglasses, but her son recognized her immediately. He'd been briefed on what to do. He walked over to her calmly, hugged her, and whispered, I love you, Mom. While they embraced, FBI agents moved in. Stella didn't run. She seemed almost relieved as they arrested her. At her trial, the full extent of her crimes came out. The 5 families testified about the abuse, the false accusations, the financial destruction she'd caused. Psychologists testified about her pattern of targeting single fathers with children, exploiting their vulnerability. Stella's defense tried to paint her as mentally ill, a victim of her own troubled childhood, and maybe that was partly true, but it didn't excuse the damage she'd done. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, filing false reports, child abuse, and attempted kidnapping. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison, with mandatory psychological treatment. As they led her away, she looked at me one last time. I expected to see hatred, but instead saw something else. Maybe regret, maybe just emptiness. Her sons were adopted by their grandmother. They stayed in touch, slowly healing from their own trauma. The older one started college, determined to become a social worker to help other abused kids. Dad and I went to therapy, working through everything that had happened. It wasn't easy. Trust came slowly, but we rebuilt our relationship stronger than before. The support group Sarah started grew to include dozens of families affected by similar situations. We pushed for legal reforms to prevent predators like Stella from gaming the system. I stared at the support group website Sarah had sent me. Dozens of stories, all eerily similar. Single parents targeted, false accusations, financial ruin. The pattern was undeniable, but something nagged at me. During Stella's trial, her lawyer had mentioned she'd been in foster care as a child, multiple placements, multiple failures. I wondered if someone had done to her what she'd done to us. Not that it mattered, not really. Understanding didn't erase the bruises or bring back the months of my life she'd stolen. Dad knocked on my door. The prosecutor called. They want us to testify at the sentencing hearing next week. I nodded, already dreading it. Facing Stella again, even in chains, made my skin crawl. The courthouse was packed that day. All 5 families were there, plus reporters who'd caught wind of the story. Stella sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair greasy and unkempt. Prison had aged her. One by one, we took the stand. Sarah went first, describing how her daughters still flinched when anyone raised their voice. Another father talked about losing his job due to the false allegations. His son had attempted sewer slide during the custody battle. When my turn came, I kept it simple. I talked about the productivity logs, the beatings, the way she'd turned my own need to succeed against me. I showed photos of the bruises, the ones I'd documented so carefully. Stella watched me the entire time, her expression unreadable. Her sons testified too. The older one described years of manipulation, of being forced to lie about other children she'd targeted. The younger one could barely speak through his tears. When it came time for Stella to address the court, she stood slowly. For a moment, I thought she might finally apologize, take responsibility. Instead, she launched into a tirade about how the system had failed her, how we'd all conspired against her, how she was the real victim. The judge had to threaten her with contempt to get her to stop. 15 years, that's what she got. With good behavior, she could be out in 10. As they led her away, she turned back one last time, not to look at me or Dad or even her sons. She looked at Sarah, and I saw pure hatred in her eyes. Outside the courthouse, the families gathered. We exchanged phone numbers, promised to stay in touch. Sarah mentioned starting a nonprofit to help other victims navigate the legal system. Dad and I drove home in silence. The radio played some pop song about resilience and moving forward. I turned it off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 10 years. What would Stella do when she got out? Would she come after us again? Would she find new victims? I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to my phone buzzing. Unknown number. My heart raced as I answered. Is this the kid who took down Stella? The voice was young, female, scared. Who is this? My name's Nick. My mom just married this guy with 2 kids, and she's making us track everything we do. She hits my stepbrother when he's not productive enough. I found your story online, and is this real? Did this really happen? My blood ran cold. Where does your mom work? She's a substitute teacher. Why? I sat up, fully awake now. Nick, you need to listen to me very carefully. Over the next hour, I walked her through everything. How to document the abuse, how to secretly record conversations, who to trust, and who to avoid. I gave her Sarah's number and the contact info for a lawyer who'd helped one of the other families. When we hung up, I stared at my phone. How many others were out there? How many Stellas, operating under different names, targeting vulnerable families? I opened my laptop and started typing. Not another productivity log or court document. A guide. Everything I'd learned about recognizing the signs, gathering evidence, protecting yourself. I posted it on the support group website. Within days, the emails started pouring in. Kids and parents from across the country, all with similar stories. Some were just beginning to see the patterns. Others had been trapped for years. Dad found me one morning surrounded by printed emails. My eyes red from lack of sleep. You can't save them all, he said gently. I can try. He sat down beside me, reading through some of the stories. His jaw tightened with each one. We should expand the website, he said finally. Make it a real resource. Maybe get some of the other families involved. And so we did. Sarah handled the legal resources section. Another parent who worked in IT set up secure communication channels for victims still gathering gathering evidence. The psychologist who testified at Stella's trial volunteered to write about trauma and recovery. 6 months after the trial, we held our first in-person meeting. 15 families showed up. We met in a church basement, sitting in a circle like an AA meeting. "My name is Sarah, and my ex-husband's wife destroyed my life," Sarah began. One by one, we went around the circle. The stories were different, but the patterns were the same. Productivity tracking, physical abuse, false accusations, financial destruction. A woman named Mrs. O'Nicholas raised her hand. "My sister just started dating someone who's asking her kids to log their activities. I didn't think anything of it until I found your website." We spent the next hour creating an action plan: how to document everything, which lawyers to contact, how to get CPS to take the real abuse seriously. As the meeting ended, Stella's older son pulled me aside. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for everything. I know it wasn't easy, going up against her." "How are you doing?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some days are better than others. Therapy helps. And knowing she can't hurt anyone else for a while." "What about when she gets out?" His face darkened. "We'll be ready." The website grew. Media outlets picked up the story. A documentary filmmaker reached out, wanting to explore the pattern of abuse. State legislators started proposing bills to close the loopholes Stella and others had exploited. But with visibility came backlash. Angry emails from people claiming we were lying, that we were bitter children trying to destroy innocent step-parents. Someone created a counter website defending Stella, claiming she was a political prisoner. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "This is Detective McNicholas," the voice said. "We've been investigating a series of child abuse cases that match the pattern described on your website. We believe there's a network. People sharing strategies, identifying targets. We need your help." I met with him and 2 FBI agents at a coffee shop downtown. They showed me printouts from private forums where people discussed difficult stepchildren and accountability methods. The language was coded but familiar. "We've identified at least 30 individuals using these tactics," one agent said. "But we need more evidence. Testimonies from victims, documentation of the abuse." I thought about Stella in her prison cell. Had she learned from someone else? Was she teaching others? "What do you need me to do?" I asked. They wanted me to go undercover in the forums, pretend to be a step-parent looking for advice. The thought made me sick, but I agreed. For weeks, I posed as struggling stepdad 42, asking for tips on managing lazy stepkids. The responses were horrifying. Detailed instructions on physical punishment that wouldn't leave marks, legal strategies for gaining custody, psychological manipulation tactics. One user, Productive Mom 88, was particularly active. Her advice was eerily similar to Stella's methods. When I mentioned I lived in our state, she offered to meet in person to mentor me. The FBI wired me up for the meeting. I sat in a diner, my hands shaking as I waited. When she walked in, my heart stopped. It was Ms. Maxamantha, the substitute teacher who'd tried to manipulate me during Stella's lawsuit. She sat down across from me, all smiles. "So nice to meet a kindred spirit," she said. "These kids today need structure, don't they?" I forced myself to nod, to play along as she outlined her system. It was Stella's playbook, almost word for word. She even pulled out a leather strap from her purse, explaining how to use it for maximum effectiveness without lasting marks. "I learned from the best," she said proudly, though she's unfortunately incarcerated now due to some lying brat. The FBI moved in before I could respond. The look on her face when she realized who I was, priceless, doesn't begin to describe it. The arrest led to a larger investigation. The FBI found a whole network of abusers sharing tactics, identifying vulnerable families, covering for each other. Some were copycats inspired by news coverage of Stella's case. Others had been operating for years. Dad worried about my involvement. "You're making yourself a target," he said. He wasn't wrong. We had to change our phone number twice due to harassment. Someone slashed my tires at school. Anonymous letters arrived threatening lawsuits and worse. But for every threat, there were 10 messages from kids who'd found help through our website. Parents who'd recognized the warning signs in time. Families who'd been reunited after fighting false accusations. 1 year after Stella's conviction, we held a conference. Over 100 attendees, survivors, families, social workers, law enforcement. Sarah gave the keynote about recognizing predatory patterns. I ran a workshop on evidence gathering. During lunch, a teenage girl approached me. "You saved my life," she said simply. "My stepmom had just started the productivity tracking. I found your guide and showed my dad. He didn't believe it at first, but when she hit me for taking too long in the bathroom, he finally saw it." Stories like hers kept me going when things got hard, when the nightmares came back, when I caught myself obsessively checking my productivity out of habit. The conference led to real change. New training protocols for CPS workers, mandatory reporting requirements for certain patterns of behavior, a national database to track individuals who'd made false abuse allegations. But the biggest surprise came in a letter from prison. Stella's handwriting, neat as ever. "I know you won't believe me," it read, "but I'm proud of what you've built. You took something horrible and made it meaningful. That's more than I ever did." I stared at the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up, burn it, pretend it never existed. Instead, I filed it away with all the other documentation, evidence of something, though I wasn't sure what. 2 years passed. The website became a nonprofit. Sarah quit her job to run it full-time. I spoke at conferences, trained social workers, testified before state legislatures. Dad joked that I'd found my calling, though we both knew it wasn't really a joke. Then came the call I'd been dreading. Stella had been attacked in prison. Another inmate, mother of a child she'd allegedly abused years ago. She was in critical condition. I didn't go to the hospital, neither did Dad, but her sons went, and they called me afterward. "She's going to make it," the older one said, "but she'll never be the same. Brain damage." I didn't know how to feel. Relief? Pity? Nothing? "She asked for you," he continued, not coherently, but she kept saying your name. I hung up and sat in silence. Dad found me there an hour later. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know." He sat beside me. We didn't talk, just sat there as the sun set. Sometimes that's all you can do. The next month brought a breakthrough in the FBI investigation. They'd traced the network back to its source, a woman who'd been running similar scams for 20 years. She'd trained Stella and dozens of others. When they arrested her, they found detailed records, a whole franchise operation for destroying families. I testified at her trial. So did Sarah and 12 other survivors. She got life without parole. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something shift. Not closure exactly. That's too neat, too final. But maybe the sense that we'd cut off the head of the snake. Of course, there would always be others. People who saw vulnerability as opportunity, who used children as pawns. But now there was a framework to fight them. Resources, community, hope. Dad picked me up from school the day the verdict came down. "Celebration dinner?" he asked. "Just home," I said. "Maybe order pizza." We ate in front of the TV, watching some mindless comedy. Normal, boring, perfect. That night, I updated the website one last time before handing over admin duties to Sarah's team. I was starting college in the fall, planning to study law, not to become a prosecutor or defender, but to work in policy, to close the loopholes that let people like Stella operate. As I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed. Another unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this the person who runs the website? The voice was older, tired. I used to. Can I help you? I'm Stella's mother, her birth mother, first period. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything she put you through. I gave her up when she was 3, and I always wondered, I should have fought harder to keep her. Maybe if I had. It's not your fault, I heard myself saying. We talked for an hour. She told me about young Stella, about the circumstances that led to her giving her up, the poverty, the abuse, the impossible choices, another cycle, generation after generation. When we hung up, I sat in the dark for a while. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new survivors needing help. But tonight, I was just a kid who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side. Dad knocked on my door. You good? Yeah, I said, and meant it. I pulled out my old journal, the one I'd started keeping during the worst of Stella's abuse. On the last page, I wrote, productivity log, final entry, learn to live without measuring my worth in timestamps. Status, complete. I closed the journal and put it on the shelf with all the other documentation. Evidence of where I'd been. Reminder of how far I'd come. My phone buzzed again. Sarah, sending pictures from a survivor meetup in another state. Smiling faces, kids who'd made it out. I smiled back at the screen. Tomorrow I'd wake up and check my emails, respond to the new pleas for help, coordinate with the lawyers and social workers and other advocates. The work would continue because it had to, but tonight I was done being productive, and that was enough.